I'd appreciate it. This is the fun part of Zoom, right? You never know what you're going to get. And I give you fair warning. I may have a very hungry cat that scrolls across my screen. He's on a diet and he's not very happy. So what we'll do is 20, 25 minutes, we'll have a conversation, and then we'll open up to the group and give you an opportunity to share your thoughts and comments and questions, not just with Mara and Michelle, but with one another as well. So in terms of what we're going to talk about, Mara and Michelle, we thought about what would be most useful, and we sort of broke things down into 3 categories. The first category that we'll get into is around the current dynamics, business dynamics and decisions in the boardroom. So what's the boardroom conversation look like right now? And then we're going to dive a little deeper into an area that I know many of you are involved with and boards are digging in deeper, which is around strategy and risk consideration. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll wrap up with a brief conversation about lessons learned as Michelle and Mara made their board journeys, and what are some pieces of advice and guidance and insight they can share with you before we open up. So with that introduction, let's go ahead, please. Ladies, I'm just going to ask you to start us off by taking a couple minutes each to share your observations of what's top of mind for directors right now. They're dealing with so many challenges. I'm not even going to list it because it's frankly a long and sad list of what we're all dealing with. So as you think about the issues and how they're showing up in your boardrooms, Michelle, maybe you can kick us off, and then Mara, I'll turn to you to tell us, what does it look like right now in terms of those conversations?
Yeah, what a great question. You know, there's so many different things that are hitting companies and society in general, but hitting companies in particular. And every one of those topics are being discussed in the boardroom in one way, shape, or form. And as I think about, you know, I could take many angles to this, but, you know, if I kind of zoom out and look at it more broadly, it really is about trying to manage the uncertainty and the volatility that is coming at every company. And those that manage that uncertainty and volatility the best are going to be the most successful. And I think how to manage that and how we've been discussing it and looking at this is from a cultural standpoint and then from a strategy standpoint. So from a cultural standpoint, how agile is the company and how innovative is the company? And then secondarily, from a diversification standpoint, you know, if you have just one revenue stream, you're going to have more risk in your business than if you have multiple revenue paths that you can go down. So I want to give you an example of how this really played out at Abbott, because I think it was really, you know, it's just really a perfect example of, you know, taking the volatility and the uncertainty and actually utilizing that to thrive and not just survive through this pandemic and all the other things that are happening. So a little bit about Abbott real quickly. You know, they have 4 different divisions. They have a nutrition division that does things like Pedialyte and Ensure. They also have a pharmaceutical division, more internationally focused. They have a medical devices division, which is really kind of more the behemoth of the company. They do a lot with hospitals, a lot of equipment related things, but also for individuals, a lot of, you know, through surgeries and things like that, implants, you know, think of stents, heart valves, things like that, also diabetes care. And then they also have a diagnostics unit. And if you think about COVID, think about what happened in the hospitals. All the elective procedures just stopped dead. And this was a pretty significant portion of their business that just kind of dried up overnight. And then you look at the diagnostics division, and the diagnostics, you know, what they did or what they do is they do flu shots. They also do HIV testing. They do, you know, drug testing, things like that, but they didn't do COVID testing. And so through innovation, through their ability to kind of pivot on a dime, they were able to get into COVID testing really rapidly and respond to the marketplace, not just with a COVID test, but respond in a way that, you know, the market needed them with a test that would give them a response in 5 to 15 minutes that no other company out there was doing. And so, this is kind of an example of their ability to pivot, but also creating a culture of, kind of entrepreneurship, and also the ability to take some risk, where it's really benefiting them to offset the decline in their medical devices. But also, as they come out of this and move to the future, they have a whole new revenue stream now that they didn't have prior to this. So this is just kind of a broader example of, companies today are really going to have to manage uncertainty and the volatility. I remember 10 years ago, we talked about this VUCA world that we were going to be living in. I don't think anybody could predict what's happening right now, that this is, the layers and layers of uncertainty that we're now seeing.
Michelle, thank you so much. And I'm going to follow up on some of what you talked about and ask a little bit more about the board's role in some of these discussions. But Mara, first share with us the perspective from your boards and what those conversations are looking like right now.
Well, it's fresh in my mind because I finished 3 board meetings last week, but it's shifted from pretty much from COVID chaos to how are we going to allocate capital for future growth. And so right now, it's really trying to decide where do I put my money so that I can take advantage of the growth. 2 of the boards I'm on are growing really crazily. And the whole point is, what scenario do you believe in, so you know where to put your money? And there's questions around, facilities, machinery, inventory, people, and where do you put that? The one board that I am that's doing okay, we had a conversation just last week, when do we start hiring salespeople? Because we got to have them up, running, and trained and be ready to take advantage of the growth. We don't want them too soon, but we don't want them too late. So there was a big discussion with how much and how many should we put out there, and how much do we see the recovery and how quickly the recovery is going to come back. But I think the other thing that's been really a big switch in the conversation, because there's always about, it's always about your financial allocations and things, is really around human capital. I think I've never seen the emphasis like we're seeing right now on human capital. I think the boards are very concerned. People that are working, remotely 24/7, are they dealing with the stress, and how is it going to affect our ability to grow and be a, good employer, and those kinds of things. And so it's that. And then I've had more discussions about culture on the boards than I've had, and I think you mentioned this in your report, in the EY report. It talked about culture as a strategic asset. I think we talk about it more than we actually have executed against that. But I've seen a lot about culture. What are our social obligations as a business, given what's going on in the world with the social issues? And I think the other thing is, we all say we're a diverse and equitable workplace, but I think the boards are more interested now in not management's opinion, but employees' opinion. Is it really that kind of place? And so those are the kinds of things that are very different shift in just the last couple of months of what I've seen.
That's really interesting to hear. Thank you. And I love that distinction sort of between management's view versus, the rest of the workforce. Let's pick up, if we could, for just spend another couple minutes here. You both talked about sort of some of the changes going on, so I'll throw it open and let whoever wants to jump in. But how are, as a result, some of the expectations of management changing from boards, or maybe what they're looking for from management teams? How is that shifting as some of these conversations are happening?
Well, I can go. I think the biggest change I've seen is there tends to be in a lot of boards presentations to the board and the management's point of view about the board. And I think we're looking for broader discussions, more generative discussions. And so more about, there's so many unknowns. I think Michelle had mentioned this. It's like, let's talk about unknowns and let's have an open discussion versus a presentation. Here's what we looked at, here's what we analyzed, and here's the answer. And so I think that's a big change in management. And it's been hard for some management people to make that shift because they feel like they've got to go in front of the board and know all the answers. That's what I've seen. I think it's been the biggest shift. I don't know about you, Michelle.
No, I think it's an excellent point. What I've seen too is, the management teams are leveraging the wisdom that the board has, because they come from all different backgrounds and, are very seasoned. And that's really what a board is for. And to have a great relationship with the management team, lets them feel comfortable, to be able to do that. I think the other expectation, or the other, maybe a little bit of a shift, is that Um, we're having additional meetings. We're not replacing the meetings that we have to talk about the crisis or the current things that are going on. So we're trying to, continue with our current governance processes and not disrupt that, but adding in where necessary. And I think the other expectation is that, we're not just trying to survive this period of time, but, we really expect that, expect the management team to really thrive coming out of it. And so how do you take the current situation and again, through the ability to be innovative and to think differently about the business. A lot of companies are going through transformations and making a lot of change. How do you really thrive coming out of it to get ahead of the curve and to beat your competition? And so there's a lot going on. And I always say, you need to have a great fire department and great firefighters, but you also need to have great smoke detectors too. And so you need to have the balance of both of those, right? In order to be successful. And we're seeing that play out right now in spades.
It's, I'll add our observations from the Center for Board Matters. Certainly this idea of more frequent interaction with management teams, looking at not just information, but insight. So not just the what of things that are happening, but the so what, what are the implications? And I'll also echo that, part of my role, I do a lot of board insight sessions or committee insight sessions, and we're finding that those are now off agenda, which paradoxically actually creates a much better environment for conversation and being able to bring in those insights because agendas are so compressed during the regular meetings. So it's, I would say, broader perspective, we're seeing some of those same trends that you mentioned. Well, that brings up one more thing that I wanted to ask before we sort of shift slightly, and that is, it's always been a delicate balance between that executive management role and then the board oversight role. The famous saying is, what is it? Noses in, fingers out. And I'm curious as to how you're managing that tension, I guess, because there's got to be a temptation, especially for those who are either in current roles as executives on boards or who have recently been, there's got to be a temptation there. So how do you manage that balance? Again, I'll throw it out and let you two chime in as you wish.
I can start this time. I don't see a significant change, except that, again, we're the management team is trying to leverage the wisdom within the group. I think, maintaining that clarity around we're not running the business, but we need to make sure that all the pieces are there and that, they have all the various risks in sight and they're managing that appropriately. So, as an example, Abbott's board is an inquisitive board, and they do a great job of that without being, into the weeds or into the details. So, continuing with, questions around the strategy and the implications of the current crisis on the strategy is always front of mind. Things around, Mara talked about, the human side of things, how are employees managing through this and really bringing empathy into the room is another pretty significant shift that I've seen as well. But, that would be the things, I guess, that I would kind of bring to the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
Mara? What
the
about
only
you?
thing I'd add is I think with COVID, because it was so new, I do think boards were meeting, like a lot of boards are meeting once a week on COVID and wanting all this numbers. It's because it was out of control. I think a lot of boards did cross over the line a little bit into management, but I think that's been back to equilibrium a little bit. But I think this is a time where strong boards get stronger and weak boards get weaker. And the same thing with strong management teams get stronger and weak management teams get weaker. And when you have a weak management team or weak board, you have weak governance and you think you have crossing over of responsibilities. And at least, I have been the fortune of not having that with the boards I'm on, but I have had friends who I'm like, whoa, you've got to be clear that, you're not management and you've got to make sure that you don't start taking those duties over. So that's the only thing I would say. COVID was a little weird because when you started like wanting to meet every week to know the numbers and all this kind of stuff, it was a bit odd, I think.
Well, and I think that's where, the concerns around liquidity and strong balance sheet really kind of drove some of that. One thing that we've also heard, which is interesting, is again, playing that role of being sort of support to management. We're hearing more about boards, and particularly the lead director, lead independent director, or the non-exec chair, kind of mentoring and working with and coaching the CEO, because for CEOs, these are really unprecedented. You know, you could be made a CEO based on past experience, and that doesn't really count for a whole lot right now. And so being able to, like you said, bring in some of the multiple perspectives, because it's not even just about thinking back to 2008, 2009, right? There are things that are different about the current state that we're in. And that brings me to our second bucket of things that we wanted to talk about, which is diving a little bit deeper into the strategy and risk considerations, because those are two sides of the same coin, what management teams really are focused on. And one area here is scenario planning. So that seems to be sort of a common foundational element of both of those, growth and revenue and strategy, as well as managing risk. And I'm curious to hear, and maybe Mara, you can start us off here, curious to hear how your boards are looking at scenarios and thinking about that. We are hearing that this is an area where boards are asking much more questions and deeper questions than before, which makes sense. It's a foundational tool. So would love to hear how scenario planning in particular, you're seeing that, and thoughts that you have. And then Michelle, would love for you to share as well. So Mara, if you can kick us off.
Yeah, we spent a day last week on one of the boards on scenario planning, because the fact is if in fact we think the use of their product's going to continue in the same trajectory, or is it going to be, higher, or is it going to be lower? And then where do you make the investments? And so we went through 5 different scenarios, and they had all sorts of, socioeconomic global factors and behavioral factors and all sorts of things. And it was a really generative discussion around it. But I think it's really about questioning the underlying assumptions, because I find all management teams have some biases in them. And they're like, or they'll be gung-ho, and they're used to kind of selling their idea to get to the budget number. And so one of the things for me was just kind of keep asking the questions like, what are your assumptions underlying your analysis? Where are your data sources? And I mean sources with an S, not a source. And what do you think could go wrong? What are the, what do you think you're missing? And then I think, what's your level of confidence? And then I'd say, what are the scenarios, did you, if you had to pick another one versus the one you've kind of settled on, why would you and what would you do about it? And I think what we found is we had to go back and we have to redo a lot of it, because there's so many unknowns and there's so much money on the line and so much opportunity on the line. It's just one of those things where you've got to really, and I think they're trying to get to this budget number, because the budget number is always done by this month. And so they want to come up with a scenario. And my thought was, why don't you start thinking about budgets and targets and ranges versus in a number? And I think that freed them up a little bit once they felt there was like, oh, I said, well, yeah, then you designed your comp over that, and da, da, da. And so I think we had a much better discussion, because it's so funny how management teams are so ingrained in coming up with the budget number so they can get their bonus. And so we freed them from that. And I think we had a much better discussion as a result of that.
That's really interesting. I want to come back to that one. Michelle, what about from your perspective?
No, everything that Mara said, I totally agree with. And, the assumptions is something that we dive deep into. And the thing that I have found that has worked really well is to have an optimistic, a realistic, and a pessimistic, scenario, if you will. So basically have 3 scenarios. And the underlying assumptions are critical, because anytime that you're not successful, typically it's because an assumption either was missed, or for whatever reason, it was just a bad assumption. And, to kind of continue on with what Mara said is, take a salesperson as an example. They're inherently optimistic, and more of an operating or operations person like me in my background, I'm inherently pessimistic. So my optimistic scenario is probably somebody else's pessimistic scenario. So you really have to dive deep into it and really understand where they're coming from. And the other thing, obviously, that Mara highlighted is, there's a comp component to this, but also, the management team has tremendous pressure to be right, to come in and to prove to you that they know what's going on. And there's nothing more uncomfortable than to come in and say, well, I really don't know. And, to be able to unshackle them. And so that has been something that I have seen as well as, the comfortableness of saying, I just really don't know. But being able to track those assumptions and making sure that you're revisiting them on a continual basis so you can correct course is going to be really critical. And that's what we're doing right now.
Well, and you teed up nicely, Michelle, a question that I was wondering as you were both talking about this, which is, with the scenario set up, the assumptions examined, what does the sensing look like? So is that part of the conversation of how do we track some of these so that we understand when things may be veering in a different direction so we can kind of sense and respond? So was that part of the conversations, or is that something that you see as a strength for management teams or something that they should be working on, generally speaking?
Is that for Mara or for me?
For both of you, but I'll ask Mara first.
Oh,
Since
yeah.
you volunteered her, Michelle.
I thought you were talking to her, but okay. No, that's exactly what we asked them to come back with, is how are we going to know? Because I think one of the things that's different this time than other times, you can always think about what's your growth, what do you think of your scenarios, high, low, medium are for growth, but there's behavioral changes here that we have no history for. So if you're, for example, if you're buying something, for example, if I look at the Purell brand, if you're buying something, how are people going to purchase it? Are you going to change behavior? Is hand washing behavior going to change? And is it going to change in hospital setting in the B2C side and the B2B side and on the B2C side? And so there's all different little factors that are moving. And so it's very hard and it'll be very easy to miss your plan. So I think what we've done is what are the things, and we did set, and we had more than 3 scenarios because we've got a lot of different things going on. And some of the other businesses the same way. It's like, what's going to happen if in fact, everything falls off, the wheels fall off the bus, next quarter. My public board's a services business. So, people are going to have, what kind of pricing pressure do we expect? And what kind of different scenarios you have on that? And so I think what we're going to do is we're probably not going to lock down the budgets till a lot later than we normally do. And so one of the things we talked about in almost all these, how about if we just let out so much money, say Q1, have a budget, but then you will, if you look back to Michelle, the high, low, or medium, you only let out money as you go because as you are evaluating these scenarios. And so they're coming back, all the 3 boards on, they're coming back with how will they be able to monitor these? What are the factors they'll be looking at? What's the form in which we do that? And then we'll get, I think better, a better monitoring system than what we have today.
Yeah, one of the things that's fascinating for me is back in 2008, 2009, I was involved in some syndicated research that we did for the company I was with at the time around rolling budgeting and forecasting, because back in 2008, 2009, we didn't know what was going on either. And there were some really interesting practices that emerged, also including, stopping corporate guidance. And I know, we had a large number of companies who paused that, but now seem to be offering up some guidance, at least for next year, general, wider ranges than usual. But this idea of flexibility and sort of rolling forecasting and budgeting, I'll be interested to see whether that starts to really pick up pace again, as it did for a few years back in 2008, 2009. But Michelle, I'm going to actually ask you to speak to something slightly different, another little category here before we start talking about planning for a board role transition. And you mentioned investing in growth and trying to understand that. Would love to hear a little bit more of your perspective on, as Mara also referenced, there's robust research showing you accelerate out of the downturn, that creates a real advantage for companies. That can really be tough for an executive team to kind of wrap their head around, given everything that's going on now. Would love, Michelle, for you to kind of speak to where the board can play a role, or how is you as a director start to really help to create and catalyze some of those conversations so that it's not falling off the radar.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, oftentimes in a crisis, it is the best opportunity to drive creativity and innovation and new, avenues for growth. And, I think, boards and certainly, in my experience, that is exactly what the expectations are, is again, that we're not just surviving, but we're actually thriving through this. And we have to find ways to be better, not just try and get through and survive. And every company is going to be a little bit different. I mean, if you're close to bankruptcy, you're not going to be thinking about how you're going to be investing. You're going to be hunkering down and trying to save every single dollar that you can. But, for you know, for boards today, they really need to think about, you know, the capital allocation and, you know, what are really the priorities of the business. And, you know, so continuing to invest in the actual strategy and with appropriate tweaks where necessary, and depending upon, you know, the impact of the business, the tweaks could be very large, or the, you know, change to the strategy could be very large, or they could be minor. I think how we can influence this is to make sure that what I've seen is, you know, crisis management teams, you know, are dealing kind of more with the day-to-day and trying to get through the current challenges of the business, while, you know, the rest of the team is still focused on the strategy that they know is sound and continue to implement that. Also, you know, as I mentioned before, you know, just the normal governance processes are still in place. So how we set the agendas for the board meetings, you know, what we ask to come into the meetings is what they're also going to be focused on. So do we have the right balance between kind of what's going on, you know, in the current environment and what's happening longer term. So, you know, as an example of the strategy too, making sure that, you know, if there's milestones that are supposed to be met, that we're looking at those milestones and making sure that things are on track. So I would say more broadly, those are the things that I think are critical as you kind of go through this. You know, we just talked about rolling budgets and kind of thinking about kind of shorter term. All of that kind of plays into the long term. So while you're looking at this short term, you also have to look at the investments that you're making and how that's going to look, you know, 1 year, 3 year, 5 years out. And it's really hard with all the uncertainty, but you still have to have a long-term view. The last thing I would say too is, you know, if you're an employee in a company, you know, you're going through a crisis and you're probably working incredibly hard, working long hours, you still need that North Star. You still need to know that your company has a strategy and a direction. And so the board helping the management team make sure that that stays visible and that continues to be communicated out to the organization and to all the stakeholders, quite frankly, is really important.
Thanks, Mara. Anything you want to add? Anything different or anything that resonates?
Well, all the CEOs I've working with are chomping at the bit to go back to growth. So this is all they're thinking about. How am I going to grow? So I think the big question is how do I make my investments so that I don't make them too much and too soon. And so it's not really about not making, I see a very high desire to make investments, because I think they saw coming out of 2008, those who did really recovered, and those who didn't, you could see they had a slower growth trajectory. But it's just the timing of it, I think, is really kind of question for a lot of them. And how much, or do we feather them in and then look at it and then put some more in? And so those are most of the, during 2008, I think there was more tentativeness around making investments. I think this time people know they learned their lesson from 2008. So
I certainly hope so. There's got to be some benefit to going through these various crises. Well, in the interest of sort of getting to the open session in a rapid fashion, I'm just going to kind of cut to the chase here on the third category of things we wanted to talk about, which was for those who are looking at a board role transition or journey. You know, what are some considerations? So Michelle, I'll ask you here first. I would say, you know, just given this group, I know there have been a lot of conversations, and you yourself, Michelle, have shared in the past with this group your journey to a board role. So if we take as given that most of our participants are familiar with sort of the basics, what in particular do you think is different right now, and should our participants be thinking about as they're positioning themselves compared to, say, even 6 or 8 months ago? So let's kind of hone in on that, and then we'll open up to the group for discussion. So Michelle, if you want to go first, and then Mara.
Yeah, I'll hit on just a couple and then turn it over to Mara. I think having a broader view on the business, a 360 view on the business, is going to be really critical. You know, we know of all the different things that are hitting the boardroom and the things that the management teams are trying to balance. We just talked about many of them. And so being well versed in all of that, and, you know, being able to provide your perspective and your advice to management teams in that regard. So, you know, being broad is going to be really important. I think the other is, you know, from a woman's standpoint, you know, we're really good at bringing empathy to situations and being balanced in our approach. And I think that's going to be really important, more so even than 6 months ago. You know, ESG is incredibly important, and how companies think about that and how they are a leader, you know, in society is important. It's not okay just to generate profits. As we know, they need to be multi-dimensional, and, you know, their standing in the world is going to be really important. And I think women in particular bring something really important to that, you know, for the future. So I would say those are just a couple of things I think that are really important.
Yeah, I
Thank
couldn't
you.
agree anymore.
Mara.
I just couldn't agree anymore from what Michelle said. I think there's one thing I noticed, which isn't a technical skill, but when we went through COVID, I think you had to be willing to kind of, a lot of the CEOs were they didn't know what they were doing. And so, I mean, I had to call a couple of the CEOs when they wanted to keep getting on the plane and keep going, where I'm like, no, we cannot get on the plane. You cannot do this. This is a bad example of leadership, and having to really be able to speak to them in a way that typically as a board member you're not doing, because you know that was in the best interest. And I think the other thing was really, I spent a lot of time talking to the CEOs. Well, I shouldn't say talking, listening to them talk, because they didn't have anybody to talk to. Sometimes they were just talking nervously, like I'm going to be on the phone for like 2 hours, just like listening to a rant on about something, because they just needed to decompress so they could go back and be the leaders they are. So I think there's different, you have to have the maturity, the broad perspective on business to have that. And the only thing I'd say, what I have seen a shift as we started doing searches, there's more emphasis on diversity, which I think is great. But the other one is there was really focus on specialists. Let's go get ourselves a cybersecurity person. Let's go get this. And then I think there's a rethinking of that now. Maybe we should use consulting firms for that and get ourselves much broader, more steeped business people who work well in crisis kind of situations. So that's what I've seen, a little bit change in the board profile.
And I would echo that. We certainly have seen for a while, there were, you know, this idea of the digital director or the cyber director. And there were some boards who held firm and said, no, we don't want somebody who's more of a one-trick pony. We really need somebody who can kind of wear that business hat and take that broader perspective. In cases where there were these types brought in, anecdotally, I would say it was probably less successful than initially anticipated, which, you know, speaks to what you were just saying, Mara, about, okay, understanding what are skill sets needed on the board versus what are skill sets we can supplement for the board, right? Yeah. So understanding that. And I think that brings us very nicely, ladies, to an open group discussion. So if I could ask everybody who has so graciously muted themselves and turned their videos off, let's straighten our hair, turn the video back on. We want to make this an interactive discussion. And what I'm going to do is actually, while this is really intended to be an opportunity for you to ask questions of Mara and Michelle and one another, I'm actually going to start us off a little bit differently to get kind of the ball rolling. And I'm just going to ask you all, and you can just unmute yourself and chime in, or if you wave and look interested, I'm happy to call on you. But just curious as to how what you've heard has resonated for you in terms of changes that you're seeing from your boards or in your interactions with the board. So we'd love just a couple of comments and reactions before we get into other questions and topics that you want to talk about. I should also note, I know a couple of you, so I'm perfectly happy to volunteer you. Linda's hiding. Lisa, I can't tell, you're leaning forward and I can't tell, Lisa Atonito, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I can't tell if you're waiting to chime in or you're just saying hi.
I'll go.
Okay, thanks, Linda.
Linda Milburn-Pyle, I'm Chief Audit Executive of Molson Coors. So Mara, nice to see you and kind of meet you, and your legacy lives on. Quick question from my side. You know, yes, a lot of that resonated. However, as a participant in one of the board meetings, specifically the audit committee, I do see a want by the board members to keep the topics discussional, and, you know, rather than handing over a 130-page audit committee deck, for example, really tightening and buttoning that down to, you know, topics for discussion. However, I don't believe all of our members of management are in that space yet, especially as it comes to kind of financials. And my question to you is, you know, what is the best way to approach an audit committee chair to help him, you know, realize the benefit of some of these more targeted discussions, as opposed to just following a straight agenda without seeming, you know, to come across as presumptuous and interfering?
Well, is this for us or is this for anybody?
Well, why don't we start with the two of you, and then I think there are a couple of other comments as well queuing up. So please, Mara and Michelle, if you want to respond to that, that would be great, and then we'll take the next one in turn. Thank you, Linda.
I think it's a great question. It's a tricky question because, you know, as an audit chair, there are certain things from a governance standpoint that they have to review. We have to go through. I'm on the audit committee. I'm on the compensation committee as well. And so, you know, there's just certain things that must come into the room and must be discussed. At the same time, there are things that, you know, we have now emphasized more than other things. And there are things that we have decided to kind of put off until, you know, things settle down a bit more. And I think the best thing is, to your point, is to just sit down and talk with them. I think oftentimes the audit committee chair is more open than maybe management is, because again, there's just this feeling like, you know, you have to come in and perform, and, you know, you have to be all buttoned down at all times, because, you know, every day is kind of like an interview almost, you know, with the board. And I think you have to give the management team permission to, you know, follow the governance processes, but, you know, bring in what's really important to them, and also understand what's important to the board chair. And some of that is offline, having those discussions. And so I think you're absolutely spot on with that.
Yeah, and I think at my former company, one of the things we did, because the audit meeting kept getting longer and longer and longer and longer. And unfortunately, it is longer because there's a lot to do. I think the best thing to do is to have the conversation, but I think we ended up having another meeting that was not on the regular thing of here's all the checklist of things that have to be done. We had a meeting just like, let's have, I mean, this is where I was talking about earlier. We need more generative discussion in boards right now. If you really look at it, we have very little generative discussion in boards. It's usually tick, 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 and it's like almost like you feel like you're running. And I just, example, I'm the chair of the comp committee and we just had a conversation. They just want us to tick, tick, tick on all the pay stuff. And I said, I think we need to have a conversation. This is a weird time. I don't know, maybe the CEO should get a pay increase, but I don't know if it's the right time to give him a pay increase. So we're actually having a separate meeting. And so I think you can just, some of these things, you just need to spend less time on the process stuff, because sometimes we spend forever on that. So some of this is good meeting mechanics. And the other one is you might have to have a meeting that's more about generative discussions, and might be a good idea.
One tactic that I heard from a couple of audit chairs, which was interesting, is to flip the agenda. So typically, right, you go through the stuff that has to be discussed, and then there's, you know, half an hour at the end to talk about, you know, the bigger picture issues. And actually flipping that sometimes can be, at least I know some audit chairs have found that helpful, because that sort of forces you to condense and reallocate your time. So just wanted to share that as well. Thanks again, Linda, for teeing that up. Other either sort of reactions to what you're hearing about boards and how this may be reflected in your experience with your boards, or questions for Mara, Michelle, or one another?
Hi, this is Karen Hung. I just want to comment, and then I will need to exit for some client work. But one thing that really resonated with me was the conversation around, well, there's two things I just want to highlight. I believe it was, I can't remember who said it, it may have been Maura, who said, you know, around a broader perspective. So bringing in a broader perspective, and being able to really think through multiple dimensions, especially given such a context where we're living in, the acceleration, the amplification of a lot of things that we're seeing. So that's one. The second piece that I really loved is this generative conversation that I know Maura teed up, and also the way to look at the agenda. And so one thing that I've seen that's helpful in some of the boards that I've been on, and the dynamics is, there's like a pathway. We kind of all, there's a conversation and there's a point of view, and we're trying to make a very tough decision, and the perspectives are sometimes pretty contentious, but being able to see kind of the opposite view and then listening, and then coming in at a point to say, well, is that a decision we really want to make, or is it just the biggest voices, the loudest voices in the room that are being pretty strong about a certain point of view, right? Do we open, do we close, when do we come in, when do we stop the virtual work, when do we, how do we continue, is an example of that. So those are two things that I just want just mention has been, I thought, really terrific.
Thank you very much, Karen. And we understand you have to run. So thank you for joining us. Love the view in your background. Other thoughts and comments. I called on poor Lisa and put her on the spot there a while ago, but Kathleen, Massey, it looked like you were trying to chime in, or Christine. So I'm just going to start throwing out random names there. So any other comments or questions?
If I could, I want to just add on to what Karen shared, because a thought came into my head. I think the other thing that, management teams, as they interface with boards and kind of the loudest people in the room, I think now more than ever, board members have to be courageous to go against the grain, because, if you have a lot of harmony in the room, you have to start questioning, whether or not, everybody is group thinking. And then at the same time, if somebody's just really strong in the room, you can't just coalesce to what they say. And so this is a time where there has to be a lot of strength individually, in what you bring to the boardroom, because that could be the best thing that the board needs at that time.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because there's so much pressure for collegiality on boards and collegiality with management in a lot of companies. And I think that couldn't have been better said. It's so important, and it's hard. And this is where I do think women do better than, personally, from what I've seen, that the women will tend to ask the question that may not be asked otherwise. And there's less of us usually in the boardroom. And so maybe it's easier for us because we're not part of the, maybe the core team, I don't know. But I think it's a really important thing, because I've seen this with management teams when they're looking at their strategies and looking at the options, they start coalescing around something too. And the whole reason for the board is to make sure you don't coalesce around the wrong thing. So
I've definitely heard from numerous folks, let's just say male folks who work with boards, that they have observed that when there are women on the board, there are more questions asked, and management teams need to be prepared for that. So that's a great point, Mara. Barb, it looks like you've unmuted. I'm not sure if you unmuted to chime in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a lot of the things that we've been talking about are topics we've been addressing with our board in the last couple of meetings. We've gone through bi-weekly board update calls during COVID to less frequent now, but strategy, risk management, enterprise risk management, culture, and how our teams are handling all of this. So, very, very similar discussions we're having. And, the discussions that Michelle and Mara were talking about in terms of pay and, how can we make sure we're compensating our teams and keeping them motivated, are all things that we've been discussing at the board, at our last 2 or 3 board meetings, very, very deliberately. A little bit of a shift, it used to be more of a rote agenda where we'd go through things that were on the agenda for that particular committee meeting or that particular board meeting. And now it's really about, all right, what is the best capital allocation decision right now? What is the best strategy right now? And does that change now in this COVID period versus the strategy we set out maybe last October? And so they've been very, very interactive discussions, and I think very, very, very engaging with the management team.
Barb, I'm curious if I could just ask a quick follow-up question. Since you brought up ERM, it's fascinating to see, because I'd been talking with directors who'd been a little bit a little bit concerned over the last year or two that ERM had become more of a check the box exercise than something that was truly robust. And now I'm hearing a lot about sort of this rethinking ERM 2.0, and gee, was ERM really worth it? I'm curious whether that's at all been part of your thinking or come up at all.
We actually took a different approach to ERM this time and brought all of our leadership team in to get their thoughts on the key risks in the business, and then did a heat mapping of it so that we can then walk the board through what the key risks were maybe 2 years ago versus what the key risks are today. And, you know, it's all in the context of who would have ever thought about COVID and what did we learn in this. And so it was a very good interactive discussion with the board. I would say the other one that, you know, that both Mara and Michelle brought up too is ESG. That's become a huge board issue as well.
Yeah, I think ERM, just to make comment on that, I think the ERM, you can't, I think we basically planned to mitigate risk that was known for the most part. And that's why I think, and it was a lot of work and a lot of effort put into it. And I think what we've learned through COVID is the only way to mitigate risk that you don't know is to have a great leadership team. And
That's
so
right.
I think we probably didn't spend enough time in ERM around leadership. And I think bottom line is people, that's why there's a lot of executive jobs open right now, because people found out their executives weren't ready to mitigate it, and they're probably, you know, letting them go. And I think we have to make sure that you'll see, I think, more on leadership in ERM than what we've had in the past, because that's the only tactic you have against something that's so unknown is how do they respond and how do they lead when they have to pivot. And, you know, we heard Michelle talk about, you know, Abbott pivoting. It's because they got a strong leadership team. But if you don't have a strong leadership team there are some leadership teams that were just paralyzed in the same, and just shows they didn't have what they needed. So that's, I think, will be the big change.
Yeah.
Hey, Cheatham, it's Sharon.
Yeah.
Actually, hi. My thought goes back to something Michelle said at the very beginning, and it was about agility and versatility, which I think we're all being tested by that in like our jobs every day. So, you know, that really resonated with me. I mean, how do you feel like your agility and versatility has been tested as this happened? And what about kind of the folks around you on the various boards that you participate in?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, because, you know, sometimes, you know, the words agility and innovation, they're used so much, and you know, the definition of them sometimes are elusive. But to me, agility is the ability to pivot on a dime. And, you know, the world is going to be uncertain, and the management teams and the boards that can identify, you know, risks as early as possible and then be able to shift the organization as quickly as possible are the ones that are going to be successful. And so, you know, from my personal perspective, it's really challenged how I think about things. That nothing is concrete. You can't get too wedded, as an example, to a particular strategy, because in light of all the changes that are happening, you may have to change quickly. And so it's really about kind of your own thought process and how you think about things, but then also, you know, how the organization is changing their culture and making sure that that is ingrained in the organization. So as an example, do they have a lot of process-oriented people, or do they have more innovative entrepreneurial people? I think you have to have a good balance of both. But if you're a really process-driven organization, it's going to be hard for you to think differently and want to move as quickly as what you probably need to move in this environment. So for me, as an example, I have been in my past more process-focused, and I really had to set that aside and be extremely comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I would say
Great,
I agree with that. I think the other thing, we spent so much time talking about data in the last couple of years, like data, all decisions can be made on data. And then all of a sudden we had no data. And so, I mean, it was like a little bit of a like, ooh, you know, and so I think what I've noticed is that over reliance a little bit on data previously, that and not everything can be decided that way. And I think the other thing that I've noticed is the lens in which you look at a problem. And I think what some people use the same lens consistently, it's all through their past experiences is the way it is. And they've been able to be a board member because they had great experience. but it's like what Michelle said, it's more the lens of which you look at and how can you make yourself look at a problem or an opportunity from multiple lenses, and then integrate that into good, good input or good questioning. And I think the biggest thing missing on most boards is the ability to ask a penetrating question that allows management to just take a step back and say, oh, ooh, let me think about that. And so I think that would be the biggest thing I learned, is that less talking, more listening, and thinking about the penetrating question that makes a difference.
Well, I think this is an excellent point at which to wrap up our discussion. When I think about the themes that we've covered, really what I'm left with is the recognition that there is a massive change underway, both in terms of where boards focus, how they're asking the questions, and how they're really thinking about the company's management team, as well as from the executive side, understanding how do you tee up the right decisions for the board in the critical moment when the decisions may have to shift, may have to alter, think about it. Maybe one way to think about it, not just agility, but also resilience to be able to keep going. And I think there are some really important implications here for any of you who are considering board roles and thinking about what you would bring to this equation, whether it's that flexibility of mindset, whether it's the ability to integrate multiple experiences while being able to bring in the understanding of how an environment is changing as we go along, because this volatility is going to continue. I think that there are some great assets that many of you will bring to the table as these changes are happening and are underway. So I thank you very much, Mara and Michelle. If you all could join me, one of the things I've started doing is doing the this type of applause, as opposed to, since so many people are on mute. So if you could join me in thanking Mara and Michelle. For those of you who don't know, this is how, if you go to a concert, for those who cannot hear, this is how they applaud, which I find to be a very effective way of communication. So thank you, Mara. Thank you, Michelle. And let me turn it over to Pat to take us to the next chapter of this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Michelle and Mara. The breadth and depth of your experiences in the boardroom, as well as outside of the boardroom, has really provided us with valuable insights today. Insights into current board dynamics, board decision-making, top-of-mind issues in the board, as well as what future skills board members might need for the future. The discussion around the role of the board being a coach to CEO in this time of uncertainty, I thought that really resonated with me. I've seen that in our boardroom, much more of a mindset from the board. So that was really an interesting part of the discussion. And Cheatham, thank you for your thoughtful organization and the structure that you put around the conversation, and for sharing Ernst & Young Center for Board Matter materials. So with that, I'll turn the program over to Jackie, who will host our happy hour for any of you who are interested in staying on the line and just casually chatting. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. I don't know if anyone wanted to stay on the line and talk a little bit about what we heard today or what's going on in the world, or totally up to you. It's always, from the conversation we had, gives us a lot to think about, what management is doing. How are we connecting with people today? It's, a lot of you have been in MWI chat, so you kind of know where we're at. So but would anyone like to stay and visit and share their perspectives?
I would love to stay, but I have two hungry critters, and in case anybody noticed me randomly throwing stuff over my shoulder, that was to keep them distracted. I could tell they were, the cat was about to climb up. So I'm actually going to run, but thank you very much for a great conversation.
And Michelle, you're going to run and see how your mother-in-law's doing.
Yes, my mother-in-law had open heart surgery today,
you.
so I'm gonna jump off and make sure that she's doing okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, everyone. It was great seeing all of you. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank
Hope
you.
to see you in person before too long.
Thank you.
2021, right? It's hard to say. I don't know if Mara was leaving. Deb, you didn't bring in anything up about ERG. I thought you probably would ask a question. No?
You know what? I am so happy to hear that in those comments, because I think one thing that I felt's happened in the last 5 months
Mhm.
is that I've seen companies through our client leadership express a prominence in their understanding and empathy for their employees. And
Goodness.
I know even in our company, there was a company-wide recognition that people needed a day to refresh, recharge, and reflect. And going into month 6 of lockdown, with all the number of employees who have little kids at home that are still unsure about how they're going to be taught, they might be going into school, virtually or at home. They're still trying to do their own work. It's creating a tremendous amount of stress on the parents. And not all of our employees live like we do, with the benefit of people around. So many of our employees are isolated. So this idea of having people, profit, and planet in balance and ESG governance, to me, I really see is going to take a more forefront position. And I think as we come into whatever you deem post-COVID, I think this is what we're going to carry forward. And that is exciting to me. And if it took COVID for us to do that, and the other thing that's interesting, I mean, I saw my 34-year-old son in the last 5 months quit his job, sell his condo in Chicago, move to Santa Fe, make an offer out there, and just try to get away from the city as much as possible. But the idea that he and his wife were able to prove that they can work anywhere, where in February of this year, their employer didn't necessarily buy off on that, right? And now we've proven that not only can we be more productive, but you imagine what happens when, after we made healthcare portable, what did that do to our ability, right, to have flexibility and flexible work arrangements? And now this next new wave of, I think, transportability, mobility, whatever you want to call it, the recognition that we could look for talent anywhere, and not just in geographic hubs, I think is going to be the next big new kind of change and move into the way we employ people. And I know, Mara, this is your lane. You're a chief people officer, among many other things, but that's just an observation that I've been making around kind of the evolutionary effect of this COVID period. So
one of the things I think is going to change talent attraction in a big way, because one of the companies I'm with is in Akron, Ohio, and they always had to have everyone live there. And they announced to their employees that nobody will come back to the workplace till April at the earliest. And they are redesigning their whole corporate headquarters just to be collaboration space. And they're going to change their mindset of where, and not only getting talent in America, but the best talent. So if you're looking at hand scientists, Japan's a very good place for skin scientists. So they might even have a hub of skincare people in Japan. And so it's going to fundamentally change. In some ways it'll be good, in some ways bad, because now you have to compete against the best in the world, not just the best in your city. So, but I think it's good for places like Milwaukee, because Milwaukee has a problem attracting talent, and it makes it harder for some of the companies here to get the talent they want. Same thing with these guys being in Akron. But I think this is a in-place company. Everything has to be in a meeting, and they are fundamentally changing their whole model. And I'm helping with the whole change in their org design and then how they're going to attract talent. So I think you're spot on. It's the smart ones are going to do that.
In that space, I've had conversation with women who are in their 40s and 50s that have a hard time in a transition. So they might be laid off, let go, whatever. They've exited from a job, and then they have this body of work and this even compensation expectation that isn't at the entry level and isn't quite to that senior level of C-suite. And it seems like companies, especially big companies like Manpower, Harley, Northwestern Mutual, they're very good at entry level acquisition and growth, and they're very good at assessing C-suite talent, bringing it in and integrating it. But that middle management seems to be a difficult place for companies to recognize transferable skills or reward bodies of work that aren't exactly the same. Do you have any recommendations or remarks that I might share with women as I have those conversations?
I think that's hard because those jobs are the jobs that you're trying to develop your frontline people to get those jobs. So it means you're doing your job if you don't have too many open. But I think the way I always tell people, if you're having a hard time breaking through, is you need to ask more, not go for the job, but for more of an informational interview with somebody. Because I think sometimes the problem is a language usage, isn't their language is their set of language and not the company's set of language. And so I think if you can meet with them and then ask them for help, and I've had a couple, quite a few people in my life I talked to. And when I talked to them, I was like, oh, well, if I read your resume, I didn't get any of that. You know what I mean? And, but, oh, okay, so here, I don't have a job for you, but if you said it this way and you did it this way, I think you would get more. Because sometimes when we have our own body of work, we're really invested in it and we're thinking about it from our perspective. And I always tell people, this is a marketing tool, not your, your list that you show your mother everything you've done. So you got to treat it like a marketing tool. And if you don't know how to write a marketing tool, you should go get professional help in doing it. So that's what I would do. I think informational interviews, most people will do that.
Yeah, and I guess I was looking at it from the company standpoint. Are you seeing a shift in the way companies are thinking so that they have a better methodology of evaluating? No. Okay.
No, because I don't think they see a need, because the focus on a company is how do I develop my frontline people so they can move up to middle management. And I don't want to fill middle management externally. That's a failure in the system. So no, I don't think they're looking at that. Okay. I think you're going to see some of that for diverse talent, because the only way to feed in diverse talent in your organization is to bring them in. If you didn't bring them in at the beginning, is to feed them in. I think you'll see that for diverse people, but I don't see you're going to see wholesale. No.
Well, Sharon, I was looking at the reports that we shared ahead of time, and I noticed EY Deb did mention that ESG was one of the top 8 priorities for 2020 and following COVID. So
yeah, I mean, we actually just redid we didn't redo our whole purpose statement, but we put metrics around kind of the 4 key areas: the human talent, societal, and financial. And we put metrics around it. And we're helping our clients with that right now too, as they really try to define. I mean, I think it's like 54% of shareholder value right now is coming from intangibles versus just your financial metrics. And so being able to really put some definition around things like talent and what that means to your organization, how you go, some of the stuff you were talking about, Deb, how you're going about recruiting, retaining, the inherent value of your talent, and that maybe you have a very innovative organization and that's the culture you've created. There's value associated with that, and companies are looking to try to put key metrics around things like, what's my societal value, what is my talent value, and not just the financial metrics, but those other metrics as well. So we've started doing a lot of work in that space, and the other space is culture. And I know that you mentioned, Mara, that's in the report as well. But I can't tell you how many culture conversations we are having at the board level right now, and helping just facilitate those kind of conversations and actually doing, cultural assessment work for companies. And it is a pivot point right now for a lot of companies, as you said, that are really looking to come out of this with a growth mindset and are really focused on the future. And, we call it the now, next, beyond. And, I think a lot of companies are for sure in the next, and they're really looking ahead to the beyond and what my beyond starts to look like. And I think it's kind of hard because I'm a salesperson. Okay, this is what I've done my whole career, and sitting at home for 6 months and doing this in front of a laptop couldn't suck any more than what it does. I am used to being in front of my customers. They are my friends, and I'm an incredibly collaborative person. But we will come out of this, and we will be better for it. And I think it's a unique time for relationship building as well, in some of these kind of interesting ways that we've been able to do it. But a lot of our clients are really looking at, what am I going to do to grow? Because I'm really, to your I really need to be focused on my growth strategy. It can't be all about managing where I am today. So tons of good things in kind of the Center for Board Matters stuff that we do, but just a lot of things that you talked about in this conversation today are, boy, we're kind of hearing them in spades from a lot of our clients.
And I'm having more and more conversations with investors that are solely the topic is ESG. So they can see our financial disclosure, they can run their models, but the qualitative aspect of what you're doing on ESG is what they're probing, and that's how they're using the conversation with me, is to better understand where we're headed. And it's a journey, right? So it's an evolution within the company, but it's top of mind of the board and it's top of mind of our investors.
Pat, how have you gotten smart about it? What are kind of the places that you've gone to kind of just continue to kind of educate and get yourself kind of to a good place of comfort and or just looking ahead?
Yeah, it's such a vast discipline. I mean, it's so huge. And I try to prioritize based on what the inbound interest is. So understanding what stakeholders are looking for. Right now, there's plenty of disclosure around governance. That's all in the proxy statement. That's there, and it's been there, and it keeps getting, there's more and more disclosure required. So it's refining as we go. But for us, we're a manufacturing company. It seems to be the locus of focus is around greenhouse gas emissions. So it's about climate change. That's what I'm spending more and more time on. So hiring consultants to help us, energy consultants to help us understand how we can reduce energy consumption in our manufacturing facilities, how that translates into greenhouse gas emission reduction, how that can inform us on setting goals for improvement, aspirational goals, longer term goals. That's where we're focused right now. So over the next 6 months, we'll have nailed down some goals and probably be in a position to publish some of those.
That's awesome.
Goals.
But I think, isn't it moving, like, at least the conversations I've had, it's moving, like E was the really big piece of ESG. It was like a big E and a small S and a small G, then it became a big G. Now it seems like the S has gotten really big. And I think you're going to see a lot of disclosure. I think they're going to push for more disclosure on diversity, and they're going to push for a lot of disclosure on things that probably a lot of us aren't really ready to disclose in our businesses.
Right.
And I think part of this is going to be how many people move up through the pipeline. They're going to, it's going to be, and if we get a Democratic president, and those changes will happen a lot even faster. So I think we're not ready for the S yet, but it's coming. It's coming big.
It's coming.
Coming.
We often don't even have the systems to make to do those measurements.
Yeah, that's the problem.
I found through all of this journey, we've invested in systems and processes for all of our financial disclosure, but we don't have processes that we're just creating them, creating processes from scratch to think about reporting the E and the S and the E and the S really. That type of public disclosure. So you're right, Maura. We're A, we don't have the systems, and B, we're not ready to disclose that.
Think about it internally. 'Cause internally, people loved it when you disclosed E.
Yeah,
that's right. Great, because they want to. But you start disclosing stuff that's related to their personal lives. That's going to be even more fun. It's going to be really fun. So I can't wait to see it. Actually, glad I retired.
You picked a really good time to do that.
Yeah, my timing was good on that part.
Very good at that part too.
Earlier might have been better, so I could have traveled. But
that's what you're going to be able to one day. Now you were saying before, and Mara was saying she's never seen September in Milwaukee because she's usually always on the road. So another plus, and we're going to have some weather. And, there's always some upside here. But I'm hopeful. I think what I'm hearing, not being involved that I'm involved in all of it, the companies are beginning to become more and more and more transparent. I mean, because they have to. which will be good in all aspects, I would think.
Yeah, well, it's going to be demanded by employees.
Demanded, it is. Yeah.
Because all this stuff that happened after George Floyd of just, sending out statements, everybody blah, 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 and that's going to wear thin on employees.
Yeah.
And they're just going to be like.
Especially the youngest employees.
What?
Especially the youngest employees.
Yeah,
You know, Gen Z enters the workforce, they are coming in as diverse candidates themselves. They come from mixed families and mixed environments and children of immigrants, and they have no patience for this slow method of transformation. They just expect it, walking in the front door.
They have no patience anyway, do they? How many people have
You will get social protests or physical protests from employees, which you never used to have. I mean, we've already seen it at Google, who has young employees. They protest. They made them all rich and they protested. So can't buy them off the money. So that didn't work so well.
They want a lot more today.
Well, this is the thing. People, we think of businesses, and my generation think of businesses as being an economic enterprise that provides you employment, hopefully for some period of time, but they look at them as social enterprises. They don't see them as economic enterprises, they see them as social enterprise.
Not only for the product, but for the results of the product.
Exactly.
Well, Sharon, that's what you were saying. What, 54% of your client? I mean, which is big change from where it was.
Yeah.
Well, I can remember I was saying something. I brought this up at first with Deb. It came up in one of our chats, and she had talked about how maybe MWI would want to be more involved in the discussion in some way with because things are changing.
Well, and I think, Jackie, when I first kind of became aware of it a year and a half ago, it was in line with the discussion that the more women on boards, the more push for more ESG type governance. And this idea that women are more empathetic, if we can say. And Mara, one of the things I learned from your presentation to MWI a year ago is we're really not all that different, except for that men are more narcissistic or something like that, right? But the idea that I think it's okay for us to recognize that as women, we do bring a different, somebody said, lens, to the questions we're asking, the things we're considering. And that's why I believe ESG is, come on more, is because there's more women on boards. And I hate to be sexist about it, but I think though, when you get to a certain generational divide, and I don't know where the demarcation is, maybe under 40, over 40, there are more men who are more in tune to ESG governance. Again, the social and the planet, and all that in balance with profit. And I think more of that group of investor shareholders are going to be okay with the idea of profit being in balance with contribution to environment and social. And so that's, Jackie, where I just thought these discussions are so good for that reason, because there is a movement and it's time. And like you said, Mara, get ready, because you're going to have to disclose more, and that's okay. That's good. None of this, in my opinion, is bad.
Good.
And I think going forward, it's not going to be so much what statistics you can show or what Mara mentioned, the statements that you make. It's going to be what you do. Silicon Valley, you think of Silicon Valley as this great panacea, and yet it's very, very male dominated. And, I think that's going to change a lot. So it's not going to be maybe what you disclose or what you show, because everybody's going to have different measurement processes, but rather what you really are doing, what they can see, what actions are seen.
Right. And even when we see anecdotally, I don't know what the data was that was used to measure this, but that the countries that did better coming through the COVID experience were those run by women. And so I think there's a lot for us to learn there, a lot for us to examine, say, what was this about that kind of leadership style? To your point, Mara, strong leadership is what gets us through uncertainty, because when you can only drive as far as your headlights in the dark, and men and women are given the same data, why is it that one behaves differently than the other, right? And we can go back into, again, our intuitive, our all those other things about male and female psychology. But it's true, we're in a period where I think we're going to have sustained uncertainty. I don't think it's going to get any better. I don't think things are going to get any more certain. And so those skills that women bring, I think it's okay for us to acknowledge that and, you know, and lean into it, so to speak.
Well, you know, that's interesting you said that, because I was thinking back, and I told you, mentioned I talked to a number of the CEOs, two of the CEOs are, well, I have one CEO that's male and two are female, which is weird. But the one woman, I just started the other board, so I'll put that to the side, but the other woman, the one woman CEO, she just wanted somebody really just to support her. I mean, you know, she just, she needed to like whatever. But I think the guy in particular, he did not know how to deal with some of this stuff. So he was like, but it was almost like a little bit like your kid whining, but I want to have my meetings in person. Well, you can't, you know what I mean? You know, it was a little bit like, you know, and he's a great guy, but he was just like, well, and I want to like, I'm going to have to go and fly and see people in person, or I can't do it. I'm like, well, you can't. And that's irresponsible. And finally, only when I finally said to him, because this went on forever, I finally said, we're in the size company right now where we don't have a backup for him, you know, because the company's fairly young. I said, your whole family's wealth's in this company, right? He's like, yeah. And I go, well, you're putting it in jeopardy. Because you get out and get sick, there's nobody to back you up. So you are just jeopardizing your family's wealth. Oh, that got him. Then he changed. But up to that point, I was like, I can't, I've tried everything in my little bag I could come up with. But it was interesting. He didn't really understand. And, you know, he was asking me questions like, but Mara, how do you create culture if I'm not in person and I'm not showing that? I mean, he didn't really understand. I mean, he was asking me, he was very frustrated by it. And so I think, to your point, I think, Deb, is that I was helping him think through things that were, of course, as a woman, you would know if your kid lives with you, how you'd act with them, or if they were in college, how you'd still interact with them, but it didn't compute for him. I think from my friends, I think that pretty much, I saw that a lot with a lot of male CEOs, because their thing of leadership is I get in front, I take charge, I talk louder when I want something done, and this is what I do. And they were like, I don't have another mental model. Like, they didn't have a mental model. And matter of fact, this guy didn't even want to, he goes, well, I'm going to do phone calls and I'm not going to do Zoom. I'm like, that's ridiculous. You know, and so, yeah. So I think, I don't know where I went on that, but I think it's so true that women can have that too, because you're like, it would never cross my mind. First thing I thought was, well, how do I have to change my leadership to be effective? My first question.
Yes, you just don't want to do it the same. My husband has a smaller company, but he's still like, you know, he's the baby boomer generation. And again, go back to Deb, you know, they were hiring people. He goes, well, I can't hire someone if I can't see him in person. Well, you can't. That's just the way. There's other things going on, but you know, he had someone. He finally has changed, but it wasn't automatic as easily. Now he's done a great job. But I'm thinking here, Deb Seeger just has a new position. Congratulations, by the way. But
Thank you. And you know, they've never met me.
You did it all virtual. I mean, which is really amazing. That's how it's.
Yeah.
What was your new position? Tell us so we can celebrate.
Yes.
So I'm with BDO Consulting, and you know, one of the things that I didn't know, because I hadn't paid enough attention lately in my own little world, was that BDO has grown as much in the last 4 years as they did in their first 100.
No kidding.
Wow.
How many years?
In the last 4 years, they doubled in size from their first 100 years.
Unbelievable. Wow. Oh, what a great place to be, Deb.
Well, and so imagine the growth and the change. And so they built a culture of change, you know, readiness and acceptance. And that allowed them to be agile and to pivot, so that the whole process was virtual. I didn't meet anybody. The whole onboarding is virtual. I have not met another person in the company in person yet.
And so you're on BDO's board?
No, I'm a managing director with BDO, in part of their accounting and finance service group.
I'm on the one of the boards I'm on, the public board I'm on, the audit chair. It was the CEO of BDO a few years ago, and he is amazing, ethical, smart man. Oh my God, he's so good. So you have good people there, I know.
Well, but to think that, you know, I wanted to, Jackie knows this, I said, I'm going to go to a company that puts people first. And I never considered a big global 6,000 employees company would be able to say that and actually do it. And I'm telling you, They do.
Yeah, no, he's a class act, and he was a former CEO. I think he's been gone for about 6 years now, but he's a good guy.
So Debbie, are you working with clients regionally or nationally? Are your clients global entities that you're dealing with time zones and cultural differences? Tell us about your client portfolio.
Yeah, and so I'm on the national practice for how we deliver accounting and finance services, whether it's loan staff, outsourcing their department, putting in an interim solution, a direct hire, all those different service lines to deliver accounting finance support to our clients. My job is to make sure we have a national, consistent, applied way to contract and engage and deliver those services. So I don't have any client facing.
I see.
Mm-hmm. You don't know. Now, Mara, you just joined our board recently. Now, did you do that virtually, or did you start the discussion way before you joined?
I had started it ahead of time, but I had 3 interviews for 3 other boards at the same time. They were all.
I remember you said you had a number.
Yeah.
All
Yeah, they're all virtual. Mm-hmm. And then I, unfortunately, they all conflicted with each other, so I had to pick one.
Mm-hmm.
And did you refer another female candidate for the others?
I did. Yeah. I gave them, actually, an African American candidate as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think they were looking for something very specific. It wasn't the easiest thing. So far, they haven't filled the other 2. So.
Well, it is different. I don't know who was telling us this, that we interviewing for a board position. Maybe it was Michelle or you when we had our discussion, and how they actually had a dinner.
Oh, I told you, my friend did.
Yeah, your friend did. And so you're interviewing, and they're both having dinner in their house, temple house.
They wanted to have a dinner with her spouse.
How do you do this? It's so different.
Her and her spouse.
That's right, your friend.
With the lead director and his spouse had a Zoom meeting where that's part of the whole thing. And yeah, well, she got the job, but I mean, it was like, I was like,
did they have the food delivered?
What?
Did they have the food delivered so they were all in the same thing?
They did. And I just thought, well, that's a little bit going over the board. But, you know, frankly, when I had interviewed, I found it, and I've interviewed in person for board roles, I actually found it more efficient and effective having this Zoom. I didn't find anything. Now, I think I'd want to probably, if you didn't trust the company or know the company, you might want to go in person to see what it's like. But in general, I felt like the people were paying attention more. You had more time. You had more time to have a good discussion. You know, good. You know, because usually you spend 15 minutes getting the coffee, whatever. I don't know. I just found it really efficient and really easy. Good. And it went, and because the interviews could be scheduled, so versus waiting for a month and a half, they were all together, so you could actually get in your mind whether you were interested or not. I didn't have any trouble at all. I would have joined any of the ones that was.
You joined Uline, which is
I did. Yeah,
right.
The other ones, I had one other one was public, and this other one, but all 3 of them ended up having an intersection of potential conflict.
How many members are on the Uline board?
10.
Is Liz still giving handwriting penmanship sample tests to vet new executives?
Oh my gosh, for real?
If she did, I would have failed. But yeah, that one I was more. It's a little bit weirder company, but I was really I was impressed with this one. Is this woman CEO who's made a $6 million company, and you can't. Whatever the weirdities are, you can't blame somebody who could in 40 years make a company from 0 to $6 billion.
Oh, no. It's a great company, and I wish Gail Leone was still on, because she's on Sargento's board, which is family run. And she always talks about how much she enjoys.
They make a lot of money.
Yes, that's a family.
And they get a lot of employment. They treat their employees as far as how they pay their employees is quite good. But I think the big thing is, for me, I'm personally interested in, and that's why I'm personally interested, is she's 75.
Oh. And,
I don't think she's ever going to get me, but how do you make that switch from like a person run, a very strong personality to how do you do it? And I think to me, that's intellectually very interesting.
75.
It may be a total failure. I don't know.
I think the cool thing about her business is that she doesn't make anything. She
doesn't make anything.
A packaging company. They package supplies of all types.
But what she does is she has a very clear model of how she does it compared to other people.
I
And that
understand.
model,
The backup warehouse and then the backup to the backup warehouse. And so she's got that.
warehouses stuff. Yeah. I mean, whereas other people, they don't warehouse it and then they don't get it. So she delivers, she basically says 24 hours, I'm going to deliver it to you. And she does.
Exactly. So, you know, that's so different than like an A.O. Smith where you're making stuff, like you're doing it.
Yeah.
She built a huge business on packaging and delivery.
But a very strong model, because if you even go into warehouse, run very different from warehouses I've been in. So she has a mental model that is very different. And her model, and whether you like it or not, you follow her model.
Yeah, it's a command and control, no doubt about it. Yeah,
If you don't follow the model, you're not working there. And but the thing is, you can't.
She micromanages every detail of that company.
You can't argue with it.
Pardon?
It works.
You can't argue with it. She's making a lot of money and she's growing. So the question is, in my mind, like, how do you replicate that when there's nothing?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Whereas the other one I have, which is on the other extreme, which is they obviously have plants and all sorts of things. And then I have one that has equipment. So I have 3 totally different boards and totally different ways that they do business. And it's interesting from that aspect, you know, because, you know, other one, they have to manufacture stuff. And actually it was really funny. It shows you what a small world was. I was interviewing for a board role and the guy said, oh, you know, Gojo guy. I said, yeah. And he goes, oh, I'm going to call him and ask him about you. I said, go ahead, you know, whatever. And so then the Gojo guy calls me and says, oh my God, Mara, no, he calls me back and says, I just got a $2 million sales deal out of it. He goes, he didn't know I make pumps and they need pumps. And he goes, so you were a great broker. I haven't been able to, you know, I was like, oh, okay, great. I didn't get a cut in the deal, but that's nice. But it shows you, I think the one thing I wish we had talked about, and the last thing is, for me, even though none of this, the first one I've been in Wisconsin is Uline, but they're so interconnected. It's really scary how interconnected. You're like 1 degree from Kevin Bacon from everybody.
Yeah.
And so you need to really understand that. I mean, it's scary, actually. I mean, I had one guy in this Brightview board I'm on. He went to college with somebody who knew me. I was like, ooh, which college? Let me.
A long time ago.
It was a long time ago. But Joe, you don't, and this is how people, they check you out. It's like, I don't know. Anyways, it's weird. So yeah, we'll see. That I did wonder about the Uline thing for a while, but they run a professional show, so I have to.
I think the family business can be really enjoyable and.
Well, it's weird. Let's face it. I've been in family businesses. They're weird. All of them.
But families are weird, right?
They're all weird.
We all come from one family, and we have idiosyncrasies that are really unexplainable. No doubt about it.
Yeah, they make decisions that are not even like how you think about it. But when I look back, I worked in the brewery, which is publicly traded, but they were family businesses for a long time, and they have that kind of leftover weirdness, shall we say? Yeah. So
it's true. I think my husband was an officer for American Greetings, but it's pretty much run by the Weiss family, even though it's publicly traded. And you know, you got what Maria, that's just kind of it is, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what Coors was. But you know the way I look at it, a board job's not like a job. If you don't like it, you can quit.
Yeah. Oh, there's pros and cons to all of it. You just have to be sure the family likes you, I guess. I don't know.
I do care. You leave. It's not like you're trying to make money out. I mean, it's not like you're getting rich off of it.
Nope.
You know, I mean, you're getting something for it, but it's not like you're doing it for your, you know, your job or whatever. So it'll be interesting. I do think it's an interesting thing though, because I was on a family board for like 8 years. It helped me get the public board job.
Well, yeah, it's a good stepping.
Totally. Totally. Cause they were like, oh, you've been on the thing. They also wanted to call the family. Cause they're thinking if it's their family money is no different if you're on a like PE, that's their money too. And so I think you get a reference that way of how people think you think and how you deliver advice outside of your job. Yeah. So I would always encourage somebody to go on a private board.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes it's more fun because it's like you're in it. You actually, more than governance, you kind of dig in. Like I'm helping them with their whole org design. So intellectually, sometimes it's more fun if you ask me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Whether you like it or not. But there's more chances, I think, for women to get on. There's more family-owned businesses.
So, work on that. Sherry, you're being very quiet over there. You're listening, I take it. I see you. I think you're on mute.
I am on mute. And yes, I have been very quiet. It's been very interesting listening to all you ladies talk about some interesting things. So being new here, I'm just kind of laying back, but
I'm glad you joined today.
Excuse me?
You got your CV up on the website too, so.
I did, finally. That took me long enough too.
That's okay.
The one thing I did want to comment from our discussions earlier that struck a chord with me is when I heard to talk about giving management flexibility to come in and say, I don't know because of COVID-19. So being a CFO reporting to quite a few boards, I've been faced with that decision of budget was approved. My budget got approved like March 31st and COVID-19 hit March 17th. And so really we didn't do a lot to change our budget, knowing that, you know, we needed a budget, but of, you know, everything going on. And then having the flexibility to go in and say, it's okay to say, I don't know right now. That gave me a lot of, it made my job easier. And then we did forecast, the same thing I heard Mara talking about is worst, best, and case scenarios, so that I could present to the board, you know, worst case, we don't have another, we don't sell another thing between now and year end. What's that gonna look like? Best case, we do as well as we thought we would with the budget. Somewhere in between, what's that gonna look like? And so I think boards having that flexibility to give their finance people to say, hey, it's okay to say, we don't know, because being in finance, you're supposed to know, and your numbers are supposed to always be good. And you're supposed to make budget no matter what. So that really struck home with me. And I found that happened with the boards that I report to. They were all very understanding. So interesting times.
That's for sure.
Well, that's good to hear.
And Debbie, welcome. Congratulations on your new job.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. Good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Good
luck.
It's been a wild ride these 5 months, you guys. I mean, you know, we have hurricanes coming in Houston, and there's wildfires in Denver and out west, and
It's a nightmare.
I don't know how much farther we can stretch the resilience of our people, but we're about to find out.
I think what was telling to me when we had the last MWI chat, which was with a larger group, not just the small ones we were, and Lisa was part of that, maybe both Lisas. I got it. But the fact when we asked, you know, how would you describe your last month in one word? And then we put a word cloud together, and you could see, I mean, the frustration, right, Lisa, when I don't know, I know I didn't expect all these upbeat words, but I think people are getting, not to the end of the rope, because we'll all keep going. I mean, you will. But it was very telling to me, challenging, stressful, you know, unsettled. And that's.
I think a roller coaster was the best word.
Which one?
Roller coaster.
That was your word, wasn't it?
Well, we talked about it. There were 3 or 4 of us that said that was the best word.
I think that was the best word too. And if you notice, we did the word, wasn't that in the middle, but that's exactly what it was. And I know that really hit me.
Yeah, it's because there's so much uncertainty and there's so much emotion.
Yes.
And you know, you feel good one day and the next day you're like, why do I feel so different?
Yeah.
You know, one day you're okay with the video presentation and, you know, online activity. And then the next day you're like, could we just have a cup of coffee together? Could we just be outside together? So it's really, it's a really big challenge for sure. I think, Debbie, my assessment from my conversations is that for the second quarter of the year, March, April, May, June, that period on the calendar, people were willing to limp along, make it work, piecemeal life together. And now I think they're coming to a period of realization that says, oh, this is it. This is our new arrangement. And so now it's more difficult. Epic just came out with a research of their own productivity, and they're discovering that productivity is decreasing. And I think, well, it is summer in Wisconsin, and I think we always see a dip in productivity in Wisconsin. I mean, I'm just saying. And then we get back to it in October. So maybe they'll see an uptick in that. But I think as families figure out homeschooling and I've talked to several women, especially because my life is all about women, but several women who seriously are considering stepping out of the workplace, taking reduced job assignments, fewer hours, just so that they can manage their life. Because what they're realizing is that the infrastructure that women had put in place to support themselves working outside of the home is gone. And so they don't have that. They don't have the daycare service, the cleaning service, the ability to multitask, to make 3 stops on the way home, to be, create efficient life. It's women are really concerned about the next stretch on the calendar.
Yeah, there's this phenomenon, and I don't know the word for it, but it was described to me as if you are climbing a mountain and you get to what you believe is the summit, and once you go over the top, you see that, oh, that's not it.
Exactly.
But we're climbing through. And I think we've got a lot of people who are reaching that point right now. And it's an emotional toll that I think is creating a lot of low-grade depression for people. And again, we can only be stretched under this much stress for so long. Jackie, like you said, we're going to keep going, but how will we be present? Not in the way we used to. And I'm sorry, but I have to sign off. And so, Jackie, I didn't get to see the woman who was signed in, but we didn't see her face, is new, and I didn't get to say hello to her. So, Rajita?
Oh, Ratika, yes, she came. She somehow managed. She joined at 5 o'clock. I don't know what she was doing.
Oh.
Ratika, yes.
Sorry, I'll say hello to her next time. Thanks, everyone.
Hopefully, maybe she'll join some future chats we have, and you can get to visit with her.
Okay.
She's in a job transition too. She was a diversity and inclusion officer at Associated Bank, but they did some downscaling and so forth maybe a couple months ago. So she did reach out to me. So it'd be good for her to get to visit with people. You never know what's out there. Like,
Jackie?
Yes.
Maybe you want to mention to her the Women's Fund Women in Transition group.
Good idea.
In joining. So feel free to give her my name and number.
All right, and you're still doing you're doing through Zoom?
Yeah, we just had a meeting today, actually. Yep.
Okay, I'll let Ratika know.
Okay, sounds good.
Bye everyone, and Sherry, thanks again for that CV. Bye, Pat.
Bye, Jackie.
Hey, Pat, I'm still waiting to find. I'm waiting from your assistant to get your availability to meet with him. I know she was out yesterday afternoon. I had emailed her, I think, Monday morning.
Okay.
So I don't know where because normally is it Zivka?
Zivka, yeah, she's on vacation. So why don't I'll send you some
back, because maybe Thursday or Friday, and then I can see if Kim's free.
Okay, I'll send you some times on Thursday and Friday.
Because tomorrow I'm taking off, and then I'm around on Thursday or Friday.
I'll send you some times, Jackie.
Okay, go see those grandkids.
Yes, have fun with them.
I'm glad a few people stayed to chat. It was
I agree. It was really good.
Those that stayed, they benefited. All right.
Okay.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.